President Kennedy held his last news conference. If I recollect correctly, this was a conference that was held in the morning in response to requests by afternoon papers. You know, even some of the conservative newspapers that criticized the president for managing the news were among those who asked that they be given a shot at a presidential news conference. In other words, they didn't confuse their political beliefs with the power of a presidential headline, whether it be President Kennedy or President Eisenhower or who. And so the president held a morning news conference. I believe it was this one. And it occurred to us that at this time you would like to hear the President of the United States on his last meeting with the reporters, his last direct and informal contact with the people of this country through the newsmen who cover Washington on radio, television, and for the press. It so happened that on that day, NBC's Robert Goralski introduced the late president at his last news conference.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Morning, gentlemen. Ladies. Come in. Yes.
How menacing do you regard the Cambodian threat to reject our foreign aid? Can that country be slipping into the communist orbit, do you believe?
Well, I regard it as serious. It's my hope that Prince Sihanouk, who must be concerned about the independence and the sovereignty of his country, he has, after all, been involved for many years in maintaining that independence, will not decide at this dangerous point in the world's affairs to surrender it. I would think that he's more concerned about Cambodian independence than we are. After all, he's a Cambodian, so that my judgment is that in the long run that he will protect that independence. It would be folly not to, and I don't think he's a foolish man.
Mr. President, how do you regard the case involving Professor Barghorn, and what are we doing about getting his release from the Russian government?
You know, the American ambassador, the United States Embassy has made 6 protests to the Soviet government in the last 48 hours. Ambassador Kohler has been to the Soviet Foreign Ministry personally. The United States government is deeply concerned about the unwarranted and unjustified arrest of Professor Barghorn by the fact that he was held for a number of days without the United States being informed of it, and that the United States officials in the Soviet Union have not had an opportunity to visit with him. He was not on an intelligence mission of any kind. He's a distinguished professor of Soviet affairs. He's played a most helpful and constructive role in arranging cultural exchanges, scientific exchanges. We're concerned not only for his personal safety, but because this incident, I think, can have a most serious effect upon what we understood the Soviet government's strong hope, and was certainly our hope, we would find a widening of cultural, intellectual exchanges. We've heard from a good many universities and private organizations which have expressed their alarm, who've been taking part in these exchanges, and it's quite clear that the professor's early release is essential if these programs are to be continued. I can assure you that the Department of State, our embassy in Moscow, will do everything it can to effect the early release of the professor. His arrest is unjustified. I repeat again, he was not on an intelligence mission of any kind. I'm hopeful that this will become quickly obvious to the Soviet Union and that they will release him.
President.
Yes, Mr. Gallagher.
Some persons view Professor Barghorn's arrest as a sign the Soviets are now deliberately seizing innocent Americans with the aim of later swapping them for some of their convicted espionage agents, or that the Soviets may be doing this with the hope of somehow extracting political concessions from us. How would you view any such tactics?
Well, I wouldn't think, obviously they would not be successful. I wouldn't attempt to make a judgment as to the conduct of the Soviet Union or what may motivate it from week to week, day to day. But I'm certainly, it's quite obvious that if it's based on the presumptions you state, that it will not be successful.
Mr. President?
Yes?
What are the prerequisites or conditions for resumption of some form of trade with Red China?
We're not planning to trade with Red China in view of the policy that Red China pursues. When the Red Chinese indicate a desire to live at peace with the United States, with other countries surrounding it, then quite obviously the United States would reappraise its policies. We're not wedded to a policy of hostility to Red China. It seems to me Red China's policies are what create the tension between not only the United States and Red China, but between Red China and India, between Red China and our immediate neighbors to the south, and even between Red China and other communist countries. Yes.
The President, now seems unlikely that you'll get either your tax bill or your civil rights bill in this session of Congress. Does that disturb you?
Oh, I think that the longer they're delayed, I think that, yes, I think it is unfortunate. The fact of the matter is that both these bills should be passed. The tax bill's been before the Congress for nearly a year. Civil rights has been there for a much shorter time. It didn't go up till June. And I'm hopeful that the House will certainly act on that in the next month, maybe sooner. The tax bill, the hearings have been quite voluminous. It seemed to me that it might be possible to end those hearings and bring the matter to the floor of the Senate before the end of the year. Otherwise, the civil rights bill will come over after the first of the year. There may be a very long debate. The tax bill may be caught up in that. I suppose some people are hopeful that that's so, but I'm not. And I think that the economy will suffer. The economy will suffer, and I think that I certainly would not want to be responsible for that. Therefore, we'd like to get the tax bill out of the way quickly and this important piece of legislation. I would think the members of Congress would.
Mr. President, there have been published reports that General Harkins may have lost his usefulness in Vietnam because of his identification with the Diem regime and lack of contacts with the new generals running the country. Would you care to comment on that?
I think it's wholly untrue. I have complete confidence in him. He was just doing his job. I think he said in the interview yesterday he had seen Mr. New, I think, only 3 times. He'd seen President Zim on a number of occasions. That was his job. That was what he was sent for, to work with the government in power. That's what he will do with the new government. I have great confidence in General Harkins. And there may be some who would like to see General Harkins go, but I plan to keep him there.
Mr. President.
Yes.
Following up that, sir, would you give us your appraisal of the situation in South Vietnam now since the coup and the purposes for the Honolulu conference?
Well, because we do have a new situation and a new government. We hope a increased effort in the war. The purpose of the meeting in Honolulu, which Ambassador Lodge will be there, General Harkins will be there, others, with Secretary McNamara and others, and then, as you know, later Ambassador Lodge will come here, is to attempt to assess the situation, what American policy should be, what our aid policy should be, how we can intensify the struggle, how we can bring Americans out of there. Now, that is our object, to bring Americans home, to permit the South Vietnamese to maintain themselves as a free and independent country, and permit the democratic forces within the country to operate, which they can, of course, much more freely when the assault from the inside, and which is manipulated from the north, is ended. So the purpose of the meeting in Honolulu is how to pursue these objectives. Yeah.
Mr. President, Madam New has now left the United States, but indicated that she intends to return. Will we renew her tourist visa?
Yes.
And if she asks for it, will we grant her permanent residence, perhaps as a political
I think we
resident?
waited, but it would certainly permit her to return to the United States if she wishes to do so.
Year by year, the foreign aid program seems to encounter more and more resistance in the Congress, and this year we're seeing senators who ordinarily in the past have gone along with the program.
Yes, this is the worst attack on foreign aid that we've seen since the beginning of the Marshall Plan.
In the event that one of these years the Congress, the arguments for foreign aid notwithstanding, surprises itself by voting the program out, what would we then do?
I think it would be a great mistake. I think, of course, some of the difficulty is where the President sits and where the members of the Senate sit. It's been said very many times, and I've never questioned it, that the Senate and the Congress have every right to decide how much money should be appropriated. That's their constitutional right. But on the other hand, the President bears particular responsibilities in the field of foreign policy. If there are failures in the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, South Vietnam, Laos. It's usually not a senator who is selected to bear the blame, but it's the administration, the President of the United States. I regard this, President Eisenhower regarded President Truman. It's no coincidence that all three presidents, since this program began, and presidential candidates, Mr. Nixon, Mr. Stevenson, Governor Dewey, that all of them, Governor Rockefeller today, others, seems to me all recognize the importance of this program. It's because it's a very valuable arm of the United States in the field of foreign policy. I don't think it's recognized what an important influence this has. Now, we spend $51 to $2 billion on defense. We spend $2.5 billion on the atomic energy program. We spend $5 billion on space, of which at least a good percentage has a military implication in the sense of our national security. We spend all this money, and yet we're going to deny the President of the United States a very valuable weapon in maintaining the influence of the United States in this very diversified world. I can't imagine anything more dangerous than to end this program. I can assure you that whoever is President of the United States succeeding me will support this program. Now, the second point I want to make is that what we are now talking about is only a fourth of what we tried to do in the early 50s. When I said in the, I don't understand why we are suddenly so fatigued. I don't regard the struggle as over, and I don't think it's probably going to be over for this century. I think this is a continuing effort, and it's not a very heavy one. It's a fraction of our budget, a fraction of our gross national product. The gross national product of the United States has increased $100 billion. We'll have by the end of this year in a 3-year period. So what we're asking is $1 billion less than in the average program since '47. The need today is greater. These countries are poorer. There's a good many more of them. And yet we're being denied. The President of the United States is being threatened with denying him a very important weapon in helping him meet his responsibility. The Congress has its responsibilities, but in the field of foreign policies, there are particular burdens placed on the President, whoever he may be. The Supreme Court in the Curtis Right has said that the President is the organ of the country in the field of foreign policy. I just want to say, personally as President, and my predecessor said the same, this program is essential to the conduct of our foreign policy. And therefore, I'm asking the Congress of the United States to give me the means of conducting the foreign policy of the United States. And if they do not want to do so, then they should recognize that they're severely limiting my ability to protect the interests of the country. That's how important I think this program is.
President, before you leave the subject, sir, would you comment just a bit further? It is still a fact that a negative action by Congress is something that an administration has great difficulty in coping with. Has the administration, has the government looked ahead to that possibility and prepared against it?
No, I can't believe that the Congress of the United States is going to be so unwise unless we're going to retreat from the world. We're going to give up in South Vietnam. We're going to give up in Latin America. I've said before that what we're talking about in the case of Latin America, the Alliance for Progress, for all of Latin America is what the Soviet Union and the bloc are putting into Cuba alone. Now, can you tell me the United States isn't able to do that? In addition, these amendments, which are passed because they don't like a particular leader or a particular national policy, as of the moment, it's a very changing world. Because they don't like the fishing policy, we're going to decide that end all aid to 2 or 3 countries in Latin America that are hard-pressed, rather than permitting us to negotiate the matter out. But anyway, as I say, they have their responsibilities and I have mine. I've just tried to make it very clear that I cannot fulfill my responsibility in the field of foreign policy without this program. Now, the most important program, of course, is our national security, but don't want the United States to have to put troops there. What's going to happen in Laos if it collapses? They're going to blame the Senate or they're going to blame me? I know who they're going to blame, so I need this program. Yeah.
As a possible candidate for president, would you comment on the possible candidacy of Margaret Chase Smith and specifically what effect that would have on the New Hampshire primary?
I would think, if I were a Republican candidate, I would not look forward to campaigning against Margaret Chase Smith in New Hampshire. Or as a possible candidate for president, I think she's very formidable, if that's the appropriate word to use about a very fine lady. She's a very formidable political figure.
Mr. President, getting back to Professor Barghorn for a moment, The negotiations for a renewal of the exchange agreement with the Soviet Union were scheduled to begin next Tuesday, and now, as I understand it, have been postponed.
Correct.
Do those negotiations depend upon the release of Professor Barghorn?
I don't think it's helpful for the professor to try to put these conditions upon it. I just say that there's no sense having a program if a man who is innocent of any intelligence mission, which is true in this case, is subjected to arrest without means of defense. How can you carry on that kind of a program? I'm sure that everybody would agree that it would be hopeless under these conditions.
Mr. President,
Yes.
Mr. President, would you comment on the weak deal with the Soviet Union and tell us whether the Export-Import Bank or whether any other agency of government is doing more in this deal than it would for any friendly country?
No, it will not do more than it would for any friendly country. The matter is now in private negotiation, and I don't know what's going to happen on the deal. Yes, Mr. Smith.
Would you expand, sir, on the changes in the travel restrictions for Soviet diplomats? For example, in Oregon, there were 5 counties that were off limits during the past 2 years, and now it's been expanded to 13 counties. Could you expand?
Well, in the case of the Soviet Union, 26% of their country are off limits to the United States, and we have put the same percentage of ours. If they would be willing to change that percentage and drop it, I think we would be willing to. Now, in the case of the bloc, we've attempted to put some limitations upon the travel of bloc military attachés because we feel that it's important to the security of the United States and to the alliance. The base of the alliance rests upon the nuclear forces of the United States. I think we have to protect their security. And the Defense Department felt very strongly that this was important to the security of the United States, or otherwise it would not have been done. Yes, Mr. Knight.
I think a few minutes ago you said it would be unfortunate if the tax bill and the civil rights bill don't get through. You just said also it's the worst attack on the foreign aid bill since its inception. Several appropriations bills are still hung up in Congress, the first time in history this late. What's happened on Capitol?
Well, they're all interrelated. I think that there's some delay because of civil rights. That's had an effect upon the passage of appropriation bills. There isn't any question. On the other hand, of course, what we're talking about in both the civil rights bill and the tax bill are very complicated and important pieces of legislation. In fact, more significant in their own way than legislation which has been sent up there for a decade. My judgment is that by the time this Congress goes home, in the sense of next summer, that in the fields of education, mental health, taxes, civil rights, this is going to be a record that's going to be, however dark looks now, I think that westward look the land is bright, and I think by next summer it may be. Yes. Mr. Van Oken, we don't hear very much.
Yes. In view of what you just said, sir, you listed certain items. You didn't mention medical care for the aged.
Yes.
Now, even though Chairman Mills has promised to hold hearings this month, there doesn't seem to be any immediate prospect of clearing it. Since he was so helpful on the tax bill, are you prepared to ask him to cast his vote to get that out of committee so the House can vote on it?
I think that we're going to get that bill out of committee, but not this year, but next year, and I think we'll have a vote on it, and I think it will pass. But I don't think it will pass this year. I think it will next year. I think that's one of the... I didn't mean to make an exclusive list. I'm looking forward to the record of this Congress, but it may not come till... this is going to be an 18-month delivery.
Mr. President, the program put forward by this distinguished committee of private citizens, it seems to go farther than your bill on Medicare. Would you be prepared to sponsor a program, say, if Senator Javits joined with Senator Anderson in a bipartisan measure?
Yes, I'm going to meet with them, and I think that that bill recognized the principle of Social Security. I thought it was a very valuable job because it was a bipartisan. The committee was distinguished Republicans on it as well as Democrats. I'm meeting with Senator Anderson and Senator Javits, and I think that this offers us a good deal of hope for that bill. I think they've given it new life. Mr. Kenworthy?
Part of the disenchantment on Capitol Hill over foreign aid seems to stem from the feeling that the administration hasn't fully used the flexibility it asks. For example,
on aid to Indonesia when President Sukarno is threatened Malaysia, or on...
Well, now, Mr. Kenworthy, we've suspended the aid to Indonesia.
But haven't suspended, have you, Mr. President, to the United Arab Republic, which is defying the UN? And,
well, now, in the case of Indonesia, though, we are suspending it. It seems to me it's much better. I don't know what the situation is going to be 3 months from now in regard to relations between Indonesia and Malaysia. I hope they are better. What is the possible use of passing a prohibition against assistance to Indonesia because of its attitude towards Malaysia when 3 months from now it may or may not be the same as it is today? That's the point. Now, in the United Arab Republic, the United States, as you know, 80% of its assistance consists of food, surplus food. We have been working to try to get an orderly withdrawal in the case of the Yemen. There has not been a conflict, I think a good deal as a result of effort which we and others have made between Saudi Arabia and the UAR. I am concerned about the Yemen because the rate of the withdrawal, of course, has been quite limited. There are going to be further withdrawals by January, but unless those withdrawals are consistent with earlier statements, I would think that the chance of increased tension between the UAR and Saudi Arabia would substantially increase. But I don't think, Mr. Kenworthy, that the language that the Senate adopted, which calls upon me to make a finding which is extremely complicated to make, is particularly strengthens our hands or our flexibility in dealing with the UAR. In fact, it will have the opposite result. These countries are poor. I'm not now talking about the UAR, most of them. These threats from the United States are going to cut off all aid. There's a great temptation if I were in the country to say, cut it off. I mean, they're nationalists, they're proud, they're in many cases radical. I don't think threats from Capitol Hill bring the result which are frequently hoped. Quiet work may not bring it, but I think there's a great temptation to say that at the time when the Aswan Dam was cut off, that didn't bring the Arab Republic to follow us, produced the opposite result. I'm afraid these other threats, I think it's a very dangerous, untidy world, but we're going to have to live with it. And I think one of the ways to live with it is to permit us to function. And if we don't function, the voters will throw us out, but not to make it impossible for us to function by legislative restraints or inadequate appropriations.
Mr. President, in view of congressional sentiment toward the Alliance for Progress program, is your administration going to make any special effort to persuade the government of Argentina not to nationalize American-owned oil companies?
Well, as you know, Governor Harriman visited the Argentine, discussed the matter. It's now in negotiation. What we're concerned about is if action is taken, that there be adequate machinery for compensation, fair compensation. We can't deny the sovereign right of a country to take action within its borders, but we can insist that there be equitable standards for compensating those whose property is taken away from them. We are attempting to work this out with the Argentine. But the Argentine is faced, as all of Latin America, with staggering problems. They've emerged from a military hunter, Peronism, and all the rest, democratic election, and this was one of the commitments that were made. So now we attempt to adjust our interests. But we are concerned about the oil, in Argentina and in Peru. Yes, excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
You were quoted as saying you were very satisfied with the vote in Philadelphia. Why were you satisfied?
Because Mayor Tate was elected. As John Bailey said, the Republicans had the statistics and we the opposites, so that's why I'm satisfied.
The Fred Korth and Bobby Baker cases have prompted some serious questions about the moral and ethical climate in Washington. What is your assessment of today's climate in Washington?
Well, I think it's always... First of all, I don't lump the two cases together. I think there are the differences between the two cases. I want to make that clear. So there are differences between the cases. Now, if you're talking about, they're always bound to be in the government, newspaper business, labor, and so on, farmers. There are always going to be people who can't stand the pressure of opportunity. So that what the important point is, what action is taken against them. And I think that this administration has been very vigorous in its action, and I think that we tried to set responsible standards. There's always going to be people that fail to meet that standard, and then we attempt to take appropriate action dealing with each case. But, Mr. Baker is now being investigated, and I think we know a good deal more about Mr. Baker before we're through. Other people may be investigated as time goes on. We just try to do the best we can, and I think that the governmental standards, let me say, on the whole, I think compare favorably with those in Washington, with those some other parts of America. Yes.
Last week, Mr. President, the Soviet Union in Moscow showed what they claimed was an anti-missile missile. I wonder if you could tell us what you know about that missile. Is it what they claim it is supposed to be? And also, what is the effectiveness of their anti-missile system?
Well, I don't think it's probably useful to discuss it in detail here. I don't think there's any doubt that they have an anti-missile missile, as do we. The problem, of course, however, is what you deal with saturation. And I don't think that the Soviet Union or the United States have solved the problem of dealing, as I've said before, with a whole arsenal of missiles coming at us at maximum speed with decoys. That's the impossible. That, up till now, has been the impossible task.
Mr. President, we seem to be in somewhat of a stalemate on recognizing the new regimes in two Latin American countries, the Dominican Republic and Honduras. I'm wondering, the administration perhaps has been reluctant to tell these countries precisely what they had to do to get recognition.
No, we've had discussions with both countries. As you know, this is not just a matter of the United States. This is a matter of nearly the whole hemisphere. In fact, by a vote of 18-1, the OAS voted to have a meeting on the problem of military coups. We've attempted to indicate or inquire what steps each of these two countries, the governments of the two countries, are prepared to take to return to constitutional government, which we regard as the most desirable form of government and also the one that would be most effective in meeting the challenges of the hemisphere. So we've inquired of both of them what steps they're prepared to take, when elections would be, who would be in the government. So we've been working very assiduously.
General Commissar, could you say whether we would be prepared to accept the same conditions for recognition there that we did in the case of the junta in Peru? Elections within 1 year, for example?
Well, I think it'd be unwise to attempt to negotiate it out here, but we did recognize the junta in Peru on the assurances that they would hold elections. They did hold them, and the result was very fair, so that it shows that it can be done. That's what we'd like to see done in these countries. Yes,
Mr. President, to go back to the Russian-American problem, given the fact that our relations seem to alternate between hot and cold, the Barkhorn case and the Audubon at the moment, what do you say to those Americans who say that in such a situation we should not sell wheat to the Soviet Union, or certainly not without trying to use it as a method of, say, negotiating some better arrangement on the Audubon?
Well, I think the wheat deal is desirable for us, desirable for the Soviet Union. I'm not convinced it may mean $200 million in balance of payments for us. It means wheat to the Soviet Union. But in view of the supplies that the Soviet Union have in its own country, in Australia, and Canada, I'm not sure that the wheat can carry other loads. I think it pretty much stands on its own. It's of some benefit to us, some benefit to the Soviet Union, but this idea that other things can be hitched onto it. But we are, quite obviously, this kind of trade that depends upon a reasonable atmosphere in both countries. I think that atmosphere has been badly damaged by the Barkhorn arrest. In the case of the Audubon, this is a continuing matter over a good many years. We're going to maintain our rights in Berlin, and we've made that quite clear. I expect that we're going to have difficulties, and the Soviet Union may have difficulties in other matters. But Professor Barkhorn, I regard as a very serious matter.
President,
yes, Mr. Raymond,
do you feel that you have a firm commitment from the Republicans in the House leadership to back and support in the Rules Committee and on the floor every provision in the compromise bill approved by the House?
I wouldn't want to speak for them. I think they ought to speak for themselves. I will say that a substantial part of that bill bears Republican language and imprint. Wouldn't have been passed without their support. It is a bill which is Republican and Democratic. I think it's a bill which is bipartisan. I would hope it would have it can't pass without bipartisan support. I would hope it would be able to maintain it on the floor of the House because if we don't, we're not even going to get it through the House. Yes, Mr. Raymond.
In view of the changed situation in South Vietnam, do you still expect to bring back 1,000 troops before the end of the year, or has that figure been raised or lowered?
No, we're going to bring back several hundred before the end of the year. But I think on the question of the exact number, I thought we'd wait till the meeting of November 20th.
Mr. President, we seem to be getting some distressing news from Sao Paulo in Brazil in relation to the Alliance for Progress. Now, the Post had some piece this morning saying that this idea has been circulated by which the alliance would be made worldwide with the participation of Eastern European countries and the Soviet Union, and this to help the alliance reach its goals. Can you tell us in principle what you think about it?
No, I don't. I've never heard of that, and we're not proposing to engage in a joint effort with the Eastern Europeans. There may be, that's a matter, of course, of sovereign decision, but I don't regard them as interested at all in the alliance, because the alliance, the Charter of Punta del Este, is based upon the development of free democratic societies in Latin America, which is our objective. Their objective is, of course, different. So I don't see how you can join them in the alliance. Yes.
Several months ago, you nominated David Rabinovich to be a federal judge in western Wisconsin. Since that time, the American Bar Association has opposed this nomination, and the majority of lawyers polled by the State Bar Association said that he was unqualified. Do you still support this nomination, or in view of this opposition, are you going to withdraw?
No, I'm for David Rabinowitz all the way. I know him very well. In fact, for a number of years, and the American Bar Association has been very helpful in making the judgment, but I'm sure they would agree that they are not infallible. Mr. Brandeis was very much opposed. There have been many judges who have been opposed, have been rather distinguished, and I'm for David Rabinowitz. Yes.
Sir, do you mean to leave the implication by your remarks on the wheat thing that if the Barghorn case is not satisfactory?
No, I wouldn't attempt to. I want to get Professor Barghorn out of prison, and it seems to me the best way to do it is to confine my remarks to what I've said. I'm merely saying, in fact, I won't even say it anymore.
The senators from New England met this morning in the office of Senator Kennedy and agreed to renew their annual appeal for relief on wool and for the lifting of restrictions on residual oil. What can you do and what will you do to help the people in New England on these problems?
As I understand it, in one case there's a desire to limit imports, and the other is to encourage imports. So that we're, I used to take part in those meetings myself. On the other hand, and there is a matter of concern. As a matter of fact, yesterday I met with the head of the coal association, very concerned about the imports of residual oil. And but it is a fact that the imports of woolens and worsteds have gone up from about 15 to 22 or 3%. So there has been a sharp increase, and it is a matter of concern. In the case of residual, we are attempting to, that's a matter of great interest, as you know, to Venezuela, which is a country that's under communist attack, and therefore we have to consider that obligation as well as our obligations to the domestic coal industry. So we have not forgotten New England.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
And that was the last press conference, the last news conference that John F. Kennedy ever had. It took place last Thursday morning.